What's your dang I'm a badass moment? Not as cool as some of the others here, but I was running through a building, down a ramp with polished cement floors, and I somehow ended up falling down on one knee. With my high momentum I managed to slide all the way down the ramp. It was very long, and then kick myself back up into running again. It all happened completely smoothly and it felt like an action scene. I went on a snorkeling trip off the coast of Kauai. There was a newlywed couple there that I could tell weren't good in the water. We're out in the water and they're off by themselves and I can see that the wife is crying and the husband has a panicked look on his face. Turns out they didn't realize that skin contracts in water and he lost his wedding ring off his finger. I scan around for a while and find it 30 feet down or so. I run down and get it and give it back to them. They were thrilled. Nothing like that King Triton feeling. I used to do this kind of thing all the time as a dive master and a lifeguard, probably recovering around 50 things for customers over the years. I once free dove 95 feet for a GoPro. Made it look real easy but definitely thought I was going to black out. Chucked a piece of cardboard at a recycling bin at work. It was about 30 feet from me. A draft caught it and took it 40 feet up and it did a double loop before slamming directly into the bin. One old lady saw and went wow. Felt like a freaking champion all day. Little League Baseball. Late 80s, early 90s. Our coach was fantastic. All of the team played and rotated through every position. This one game it was my turn to be second base. There's runners on first and second. The score is tied for the moment, but the game's close to over and we're getting tired. Plus it's mid-July and it was hot. The other team had a kid who was older than should have been on, but his dad was the coach, and he had a mean swing. He belts a line drive over the pitcher. I just start running. I snag the ball from the air a few steps into the grass toward center field, then make a U-turn and run back. Tag second base. Second base runner is out, and tag out the runner who was trying to get back to first. The adrenaline surge was enough to get us the win in the next inning. We ended up being undefeated that season. TLDR solo triple play in Little League. I didn't think how cool good it was at the moment, but when I was like 5 or 6, a woman covered in blood crawled to my childhood house door and started banging on it. I woke up from the noise and went to open it. When I opened it, I just saw her in cuts, scratches, bruises, etc. Apparently her boyfriend was trying to actually kill her and she managed to escape. She asked to be let in for safety and I let her in and went to go wake up my mom. When she came out she was shocked to see her and went to clean her wounds a bit and later called the police and ambulance. I didn't fix her wounds or anything but I'd like to think that I saved her life that day. LOL. You were 6. I didn't fix her wounds or anything. It's still super badass but that would have just been miraculous. Start of UK lockdown. My dishwasher broke down and since shops were closed, I was looking at minimum 3 months of doing the dishes by hand. Frick that. Went to YouTube, watched a bunch of videos, took the pump apart and found a piece of broken glass which was fricking it up. Put it back together. Worked perfect. Frick you entropy and washing dishes. My dad does this kind of stuff constantly. LMAO. Something in our house breaks. He calls a repair person who tells him the problem is either extremely hard or impossible to fix. Spends a day or two watching YouTube videos about the problem, fixes it, and then doesn't stop bragging about it for the next few weeks. I just relocated and extended the outdoor water tap for my 70-year-old widowed neighbor, and when I turned the water back on nothing leaked. Felt kind badass. I have a few moments that make me feel good about myself, but I'm going to talk about this because it happened when I was like 22. And it was one of my first time an adult and I'm not half bad at it moments. Was driving back really late after hanging with some friends, like 2 in the morning. It's raining really hard and the roads are dangerously slick. Some guy, well he less turns and slides onto the road ahead of me, going up this massive hill with a steep grade, and he isn't controlling his car well. I see him fishtail a couple times but barely regain control, so I back way off and slow down. Not sure if he was drunk or just the rain, but I think to myself he's gonna lose it, and sure enough when I round the next corner, there he is in the deep ditch. He was gunning the wheels and spewing mud and grass everywhere. but obviously couldn't get out like that, and I'm sure his adrenaline was wrecking any chance at slow rational thought because he just went over a tiny cliff. I pulled over, got out in the rain waving my arms to get him to stop, told him what to do, go as slow as possible, angle the wheels the right way, but I noticed his hand shaking and ended up asking him to get out. I managed to get his car out of the ditch, but when I went to give him back his keys I see his whole body is visibly shaking from the shock. So, I offered to give him a hug. We hugged for what felt like 10 minutes, it was probably just a minute, and he started crying. I assume just that wave of relief after an adrenaline rush. He wasn't drunk, or it wasn't apparent, but he's clearly not okay to drive. So when I thought he'd let most of it out I asked where he lived, which was just up the road a little ways. I checked that his car was okay to drive for a bit, that the radiator wasn't busted, etc. Told him to get in and drove him to his place, walked him inside and told him to not drive until the next day and to get his undercarriage checked. Walked back to my car in the rain and went home. That is freaking badass. You are badass. Well done. My father was denied his military pension back in the 70s when he became old enough to collect it. The government said he'd missed some reserved time and therefore wasn't entitled to retirement. Dad died some 20 years later, never having received a dime of his pension or any medical benefits. Fast forward to about 20 years ago, I started combing through Dad's old naval records and determined that it literally came down to his missing a single 4-hour drill in 1962. I couldn't believe it. He was a World War II combat pilot and had months of extra service in the 40s, but due to the way these things were accounted for back then, those months were rounded down to the next lower whole year. So, months of service just tossed away, but a missing 4-hour drill record killed his pension. Seemed fair. Anyway, I gathered records and penned a very detailed and pointed letter to the US Navy and asked them to reconsider. This thing took me weeks to prepare. To my surprise, they did. And, even more to my surprise, they agreed with me that Dad was given the rawest of deals, especially considering his service in the Pacific during the war. Some weeks later I got a retirement certificate signed by the president and a big fat check from the US Treasury for about 20 years worth of missed retirement checks. Not a physical thing, but that made me feel like a badass for writing such an indignity. It was too late for Dad, but still satisfying. Dang. Military pensions at the lowest are over $20,000 a year. That must be a shitload of money. I share mine with my dog. Did the adrenaline pumping car lift thing. My idiot neighbor was trying to change his own oil and didn't have the jack in the proper place. Whatever metal it was on bent and the car lowered onto him, which had his body positioned perfectly so the front tire would crush his dumb butt. My dog was out back and started going insane barking. So I bolted outside, wondering what could be wrong. He only barks when something's wrong, like my kid left the yard or something. I see my neighbor's legs sticking out from his freaking tire, race inside screaming for my brother, then bolt back out and try to lift the car. My brother comes out and as I somehow manage to lift the car just enough, he pulls the neighbor out. I was expecting him to be dead, but he stood up, coughed a few times, and said thanks. We called EMS to get him checked and they took him to the hospital. He had some internal injuries, but survived and recovered fully. What I remember most is flopping to my butt in the driveway, thinking, crap, that guy is an idiot. It was my brother that said I'm a badass, and as the real hero. Yes, doggo got all the pats and scratches and treats. Life pro tip, always use jack stands and not a jack if you're going to be under a car, and don't cheap out on them. They are there to save your life. I got lost alone in Yellowstone after sunset, but I'd come prepared with a headlamp, kept my cool and found my way back to my car alive. My detour added several miles to the route, and it was and still is the most I've hiked in a single day, probably just under 14 miles. I could barely move when I got back to my car. I had to just sit for about 20 minutes before I was able to drive, but I got the most amazing view of the Milky Way of my entire life along the way. Totally worth it for that alone. Any mishap you survive becomes an adventure. This was kinda weird, but couple years ago wife and I were driving home in the pouring rain from my mom's house. She lives in Stafford VA and the back roads are super curvy. Sometimes makes me sick driving it. Anyways, we roll up to a car spun up and the front is tore up. We pull up as we are the only ones there and see another car off to the ditch and side smashed into a tree. It's a pretty deep ditch side of the road and the guy in the road is freaking out. I get out and instantly get soaked and talk to the guy. He's a young dude and says he didn't see the car and hit them dead on and they went down the side into the trees. I tell him to wait in my car and get my wife to call 911. I look at the car and see the front is smashed and smoking coming out from under the hood. I gulp and say to myself, frick, I'm about to see a headless person or someone with their guts hanging out. I slide down the side and I look and see older people in the car. Luckily they seem alive and alert, but they can't get out as the doors are stuck due to how the car is sitting on the ground and the wheels are destroyed. I have to literally rip the driver door back with the guy inside pushing so I can get him out. He's kinda cut up and dazed. I get him out and he's able to walk. His wife on the side, her leg is messed up. I have to rip the door open myself as she's out of it. I put all my weight and bend the door back enough to get to her. Her ankle is broken, so I'll lift and carry her up the embankment and to the road. Luckily the ambulance and police arrive and I'm able to get her to the back. All things considering, it came out better than one would assumed. Impressed myself and wife as I just acted and didn't think, just ran on instincts. It wasn't really like the movies or anything. No one knew my name or asked for it. Cop didn't give a crap or cared. Ambulance drove off with the couple to the hospital and the young guy that caused the wreck had his mom pick up as the cop wrote him a ticket, got him his car and left. At that point I'm just soaking wet with cars trying to get around us. Anyways, still felt good. I was at a party and apparently some guy had a problem with me. I didn't even know him. I was sitting with friends and from across the room he yelled something to me, but with the music I couldn't hear what he was saying. So I said what and he yelled it again. But again, I couldn't hear him. So I stood up and said, more forcefully, what. His face dropped. He shrunk back a little, said never mind and sat down. My friends laughed their asses off. I genuinely thought this dude had a question, but I had inadvertently backed him down. My badass moment was an accident. Back in the day, I trained a few years in judo. A few regional tournaments convinced me that I am a fairly mediocre martial artist. 10 years later, a big, athletic guy, outweighed me by probably 80 pounds, took a swing at me outside of a bar, and I threw him with a massive shoulder throw with basically zero effort or thought. I started to lock his elbow on the ground, but realized he was mostly knocked out, so I just stood up. I left as quickly as I could, but I saw like a dozen guys with open mouths saying things like, "Did you see that crap?" I pulled over to throw up on the way home. One thing I've learned is that getting whacked at tournaments that you have to qualify to participate in still probably leaves you above 95th percentile of the general population. It's a weird duality. I went to a shop to buy a new bike, and I went there on my old bike. I came back home riding my new bike and by holding the old one with one hand. Everything was going fine, until the bike abruptly turned sideways and sent me flying over the handlebars. I ducked forward, landed on my shoulder, and in a continuous roll, I got back on my feet and did a thumb up to appease a startled passerby. Mission passed, respect. And obese most of my life. Worked really hard, lost 100 pounds, took up running, and decided to run a marathon. I've never felt more like a badass than when I crossed that finish line. The training and the race itself were the hardest things I've done in my life, and there were many times throughout where I really wasn't sure I was going to make it. Well done. Keep that energy and keep kicking butt. When I was like 9 years old, I chokeslammed the neighborhood bully, full WWE style. It was directly under a streetlight, and there were people all around to witness it. Because I think someone was having a party, I ran away because I thought I would get in trouble. But the adults, actually teenagers, but being 9 I thought of them as adults, just wanted to give me high fives. And don't worry, the kid was totally fine other than being shaken up. I did the same to a guy that was picking on me in the bar, grabbed him by the neck and slammed him down on the ground. I saved a life as a 911 dispatcher. My address is, my name is Ms. Patient, and I think I've just developed a penicillin allergy. The call started off normal enough. 50s female took penicillin and was now breaking out in hives. As the call went on, She got harder and harder to understand, both because her tongue was swelling and because she was getting more and more confused. I'm in the basement. Will they be able to find me? I don't know if my door is unlocked. I'm gonna go unlock it. Number. Stay in the basement. I'll tell the paramedics you're down there. They'll find a way to get in. I wrote a note to my partner, who was dispatching the ambulances. Patient in basement. Door may be locked. Why did you call me? Can I hang up? You called me, Ms. Patient. You're allergic to penicillin. You called 911. The ambulance is on the way. As the paramedics called on scene, I heard a clunk and the tone of a button being pressed. That's not good. About 1 very long minute later, the paramedic picked up the phone. It's me. We're here. The crew transported to the hospital. No lights or sirens. Interesting. I was expecting an emergent return. When they got done, the paramedic called me. If we hadn't have known where the patient was, if we would have been 1 minute later, there's a good chance she would have died. Thanks for telling us where to go. Yep, my badass call taking skills saved a life. I signed up for an archery merit badge at my Boy Scout camp a few years back and I sucked terribly at it with the lowest average for the whole dang week. But toward the end of the trip I crunched it and spent my entire free day with the bow at the archery area and sang them center, left and right. When it came time to announce awards at the end of the week, the counselor in charge of the range stepped up in front of the bonfire and gave a speech about the scouts he worked with that week. He gets through most of the names and I'm feeling pretty down on myself because I figured I was overlooked, but I can still recall what he said. And the last award is something very special. The camp barely hands it out because only a few kids here are cut from this cloth. The Perseverance Award goes to a scout I watched tirelessly fire down the range until his hands were red and covered in blisters. He started off with the lowest average of the Summers group, but ended with the highest I've seen while working in the Ranger. The award goes to my name. Congratulations, you earned it. I was beaming for like 4 months after hearing it. Middle school. I stood after school to play basketball with some other kids. I was just sitting on a bench taking a break when a younger kid, I think it was one of the other kids' little brother, comes up to me and tries to start crap for no reason. Little kid throws a punch at my face, and without missing a beat, I move my arm from resting on the table to catching his fist inches away from my face. I don't say a word and I just let the kid think about what just happened. It takes him a moment to process and then he just walks away like nothing happened. Felt really cool in the moment, but none of the other kids saw it. Leaving work at a big box store a little after 1 AM and I'm next to my car in the parking lot and changing out of my work shirt into a t-shirt. There's a couple benches outside, a few random people around. I see a car swerve toward one woman and then brake hard, and knowing a couple people out there I figured it was just a very bad joke. But then I see the car lurch forward and brake hard again and can see a woman in the headlights with a terrified look on her face, so I start running as fast as I can toward them. A ridiculously muscled guy gets out of the car and starts moving toward her. I wasn't the first person there. The first was a 14-year-old kid who was very short and skinny. The kid shoves the guy and then the guy knocks him down and gets right on top of him. The guy hits him 3 times before I get there and hit him in the back of the head. This dude was hella drunk and got off the kid to take a couple swings at me that I was able to avoid. One of the others in the crowd yells that the cops have been called and he books it out of there. Thankfully the cops got him before any more damage happened. He pled guilty and went to jail for a bunch of charges. I don't think I was the most badass because the kid took those hits like a champ and saved the girl, but I still felt pretty awesome. It takes a team, I guess. Though that kid may have, in the short term, saved that woman. Neither would have ended up in good health without you stepping in. Good job, mate. Once, at a party, a friend of mine got trapped in the bathroom accidentally when the doorknob fell off. Despite being plastered, I got her out with a pair of scissors. The quote, still remembered a decade later among our friends, was "I can do this. I was in the Girl Guides. Took perhaps 5 minutes. When I was 5 I got trapped in a public bathroom. The doorknob fell with the door still locked. Mum was with me inside. She violently unhinged the door, broke the lock and pushed the door out. I told her she was like Conan the Barbarian, my favorite cartoon at the time, and she still brags about it. Possibly saving a life. I saw a motorcycle crash in a parking lot late at night. No one but me went to check on the guy. Everyone else was just standing around looking. Dude had a compound fracture on his leg and blood was pouring through his jeans onto the ground. I used my belt to tourniquet the leg. The ambulance didn't arrive for another 2 minutes, so I might have saved him from bleeding out. Very badass, good job. At a concert in between sets, saw this lady go down. I had just found a seat along the barrier between pit and general seating. I went up to the girl and her boyfriend and told them I had a seat in the wall if she needed to sit down a minute. She was pretty out of it, but the boyfriend said that'd be a good idea. We walked her over and flagged down one of the vendors to get her some water since she was really dehydrated. Right about now the headliner, Rob Zombie, came out on stage and then a huge mosh pit started right in front of us. Myself, the boyfriend, and another guy formed a protective wall around her. Myself at the very front cause I'm the biggest. Most of the people were respectful and following mosh etiquette, but there was this one drunk dude who I guess saw what we were doing and decided it'd be fun to try and knock me down onto her. He came at me a little harder than everyone else. I just pushed him back in, then he came at me a little harder and I started to get a little angry. The third time he was almost rushing me. I gave him a decent shove and told him come at me like that one more time, mother sucker. He did. I saw him coming and this time I stepped forward into him and shoved my palms into his chest. He stumbled backwards clear across the other side of the pit and looked terrified. I shouted try again and I'll knock you the frick out, butthole. He didn't come in our direction again after that. Felt pretty cool protecting that girl and checking that butthole. I've had big guys like you protect me when I've gotten unexpectedly caught in mosh pits a few times in my younger days. I like metal and hardcore but I'm a small person and try to stay out of the pit, but sometimes they just frickin' happen. You, and people like you, are awesome, and I'm sure the girl and her boyfriend very much appreciated you. My brother and I had some friends over at my parents' house while we were home for a visit. We were hanging out in the backyard and at the end of the night I was alone with one of brother's friends. He started coming onto me, grabbing me, being way too forward and gross. I told him repeatedly to stop and to leave but that just made him more aggressive. He eventually knocked me down and had me pinned on the ground, broke my glasses and was laughing in my face about what he was going to do to me while I screamed for help but no one could hear me. I eventually managed to choke him out just enough that he fell over, then kicked him a bunch of times. He got up and came at me again. I shoved him back over and over till we reached the end of the driveway. The whole time he is still trying to grab at me and laughing at me. Eventually I just swung at his face and ended up breaking his nose. I felt it crack on my hand and blood went everywhere. It was sickening but also kinda euphoric. He ended up running away after that. I hope that's no longer your brother's friend. I'm a relatively petite woman and I changed my flat tire without any help in a snowstorm. It was a struggle and my hands were scraped and bleeding by the end, but I felt really proud of myself. Yes, I did it at night, in cold, pouring rain, and oh my fucking good it sucked, but it got done. We got this. I was a senior in high school and I was walking down the hallway where the freshman lockers were. There was a small group of freshmen standing around a locker trying to get it to open, but it was jammed. I stopped and said, I can get that open for you. Put in the combination. So this petite freshman girl spins a combo and says step back, and then I punched the locker as hard as I could next to the lock. To my everlasting surprise the door popped right open. So I said, there you go, and immediately walked away. I'm 6 feet 8 inches and a giant dork, so I felt like a super big, cool, tough guy that day. TBH if I were one of those freshmen I'd be impressed. I was like 22 and my car wouldn't start after work. Lots of googling and thought maybe it's the starter. Use the tools in my trunk to remove the starter. Walked to the parts store and had them test it. It was bad. Bought a new one, installed it, and drove home. Booyah bee. Felt good to not have to call my dad or boyfriend to fix my car. That's awesome. Always great to keep some tools in the car. Just the other day, I was in the studio with some of my classmates and they were starting the process of recording an original tune and were trying to figure out the tempo that would work best with the vibe. One of the guys was counting out and feeling out the beat and I was sitting at the desk. I was listening to him count out the beat and move around to the vibe and I was like, so about 170 BPM. They said let's try that and tap it out on the computer to set the BPM for the click track in the recording software. I was spot on. I guessed the BPM correctly just by listening to him sing and watching him dance. Literally everyone in the room looked at me like I was some kind of wizard. That is kinda wizard, not gonna lie. My girlfriend took me over to meet her grandmother one day. She was a super nice lady and while we were talking she said something about how she wishes her record player still worked because she just missed listening to her old albums so much. I'd always been a big audio guy so I asked if I could take a look at it for her. I spent about 5 minutes working my magic and was able to make an old woman cry because she was so happy to hear the music she and her husband used to dance to again for the first time in years. I ended up marrying that girl and when grandmother passed away she had made sure that I got her old record player. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.